Hello, and welcome to a Lenten Pause, a series of devotions that I am doing this Lent on the Psalms. I'm Reverend Jane Rowe. I'm the pastor at South Church in New Britain, Connecticut, and I welcome you to this meditation. This is Holy Week, and we are orienting ourselves toward Jesus' journey to the cross. So we are going to be reading today some verses from Psalm 22, a psalm that in many ways points toward the cross, and we might read it as prophetic of that moment, that world-changing moment when Jesus was crucified. But I think that we also need to remember that the Psalms were Jesus' prayer book. They were his spiritual grounding. He knew many of them by heart, I am sure, perhaps all of them. And so in his moment of deepest despair, in his moment of feeling abandoned even by God, it was to the Psalms that he turned and let the psalmist speak for him the anguish that he was experiencing. I invite you to hear these few first verses of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. These verses point to the universality of that experience of feeling abandoned by God, feeling completely alone. The psalmist was experiencing it. Jesus was experiencing it. And it's one of the things that makes Jesus relatable to all of us, that he too could say, my God, why have you forsaken me? But we can recognize that people today utter that lament, that prayer, that cry. I think of families who this very day are crying out because their loved ones fell to their death when the bridge in Baltimore collapsed into the river. Construction workers who were just doing their job. My God, why have you forsaken me? I think of families of victims of mass shootings, too numerous to name. The latest one that has captured the world's attention, one in Moscow, just days ago. I think of innocent people unjustly convicted for crimes they did not commit, but who spend decades in jail serving sentences based on faulty evidence, sometimes released and exonerated after 20, 30 years. I think of mothers and fathers and their children in Gaza who are starving even at this moment. My God, why have you forsaken me? I think of family members of Israelis who are still held hostage by Hamas, who worry that they will never come home, or who worry about how they are being treated, and families of those who were killed on October 7th. My God, why have you forsaken me? I think of people we know who live with unrelenting pain and uncertainty, who've been suddenly diagnosed with a devastating illness, or those who struggle with persistent mental health issues that stand in the way between them and the fullness of life God offers. My God, why have you forsaken me? That is a human cry. It is Jesus' cry, and it is the cry of many who have experienced God's absence. But the psalmist goes on to recall how God was with God's people in times of old, how God, in mighty acts, saved God's people. And it is in recalling those stories that the psalmist is able to find faith to carry them through the time of despair. This psalm begins with that cry of absolute despair, and it ends with an affirmation of God's saving help. And I think that that is a clue to us of how we get through those times of feeling abandoned. We must draw from the faith of the past, the faith of the community, and those moments when we ourselves have experienced joy. We can recall that God was faithful and trust that God is faithful even as we pass through the valley of the shadow of death and darkness, as we affirmed in the psalm we read last week. We must lament when we experience that abandonment, and God can hear our cries. My God, why have you forsaken me? God wants us to express that truth that is on our hearts, and to bring to our hearts and minds the knowledge of God's saving love experienced by God's people from of old. God will bring us to a place of faith and hope and fullness of life again. Thanks be